If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. I'm the president of Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. You can find a link to my work at emailrevealer.com. Okay, here we go. We got a great guest for you today. Jeffrey Rinek, former FBI agent, worked on a ton of cases. The Cary Stayner case is one of the ones that has most interest to me, but the Dugar case, the little girl that was in a tent for like 10 years, 12 years, whatever, was some kind of crazy situation there. A good old Jeff Rinek. The book is called In the Name of the Children, an FBI Agent's Relentless Pursuit of the Nation's Worst Predators. And Jeff Rinek is the most patient man in America. Okay. I got to tell the audience, Jeff, I got to tell the audience, man. Jeff came on. We tried to tape the other day, and the internet kept popping out. People are aware we kept losing our internet connection. And Jeff was a saint. We rescheduled, and then my internet wasn't even back up. I couldn't even contact him to tell him I couldn't make the appointment. Okay, I'm sending a message. I got Vic texting him from Lake Tahoe up there. Then when I screwed up the scheduling yesterday, we screwed that up. But he's back today, Jeff Rinek, in the name of the children, the most patient man in the world. Jeff Rinek, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, man. Hey, listen, I really appreciate it. As a matter of fact, if you heard the voicemail I just left you, I said, if I screwed up again, just shoot me. Okay. No fourth chances for Ed Opperman. Tell the audience about yourself. Who is Jeff Rinek?
Well, Ed, I was born and raised in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. My family moved out of Philadelphia proper to a Montgomery County township called Cheltenham. I attended schools there, and then I went to college in Reading, Pennsylvania at a small college named Albright. I always wanted to be an FBI agent, and after I graduated, I went to work for the FBI as what they call a clerk or a support employee, with the hope of becoming eligible to apply for a position as a special agent. 6 months after I got there, the FBI stopped that. And what I did was I went back to school at night full time and got the equivalent of a second undergraduate degree in accounting, and then applied to be a special agent accountant. And that's how I got into the FBI. My first office was the Chicago division, where I was there for about 2.5 years. After that, I transferred to the New York office, which is in 26 Central Plaza in Manhattan. I was there for 11 years. There, I met my wife, Lori, and we're going on 34 years of marriage. We have 2 sons. My older son is named Joe, and he's a mechanical engineer. My younger son, Jordan, is a police officer in the area here. And then we ended up choosing to come out to the Sacramento area to settle and raise our family. As an FBI agent, at the time I was there, predominantly 2 paths of your career. One is to do the management route, in which case you're moving every 2 or 3 years. The other is to build up enough seniority on the street that you could end up living at a field office where you want to live and bring up your family, and that's what we did. And my wife, Lori, is a fish and wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She retired a few months ago. And that's who we are. We're very happy. We have a a beautiful home and wonderful family. We have our first grandson who's 8 months old, and we're just very content.
I saw in some of these notes and the press material sent over that you were considered like an anti-management kind of guy, like it was hard to manage it. What am I getting wrong there?
No, yeah, that's an interesting point. Throughout my career, I was, I don't want to say difficult, but a lot of times the goals and aspirations of the people in management is to get their clock punched, so to speak, and to move up to the next position. But those of us that were on the street when we're working cases, our goal is to solve the case, to do what we were hired to do. Many times in my instance, and because I have somewhat of a rebellious side to me, I would disagree with management. Sometimes I did it more in a greater sense than I should have, which was inappropriate. And as a result, I was labeled as not management friendly. I received several communications from our headquarters telling me I was not management friendly. And and occasionally I would end up being removed from a case because I disagreed how management was working the case.
Well, you've been good to me. I'm going to put a letter in your file. Okay, tell you how patient you've been with me. But you said that even though...
I'm going to tell you a funny story.
Okay.
I was, in 1993, I was the case agent here in Sacramento for the case that's known as Unabomb.
Right.
And we had, 1993, we had 2 bombs go off, one in Tiburon, California, another one in New Haven, Connecticut. And that was an example where the people in the career development program were cycling through our office. It was troubling me greatly because I felt that this was a case where someone had been killed and we needed to do what we needed to do. And so, I had disagreements with management. The reason I'm telling you this is because when the whole thing was over, I got, during the case, I got one of these letters. I call it a letter of censure, telling me that I was pretty much an asshole and not management friendly. And then after the case, I got a letter of commendation that was handed to me by the director, telling me what a great job I did. So, in the tradition of old street agents, I took the letter of the censure and the letter of commendation, and I framed them side by side and kept that by my desk in the office.
Well, how did you want to handle that case differently?
Well, that's a long story. I don't know if we have enough time to go into it,
okay.
But I will say that eventually I'd like to give acknowledgement to Max Knoll and Jim Freeman and Terry Turchi, who were the primary 3 agents who worked that case out of San Francisco. They need to be commended on the fact that, they did do what was necessary. And if you read the accounts, you'll see that the FBI did some things that were not normal for the FBI, such as publishing Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, things like that. The way I get in trouble with management is because I want to rush out and do stuff, and I don't want to stop until we're done. And a lot of times, this doesn't jive with making plans and making arrangements and doing that. I like to act when when the lead is high and not lose it, and just do the various disagreements. That's the way it went.
Well, if you have that kind of personality, how are you handling retirement now?
Well, I'm still working. In January 2012, I was summoned by a serial killer named Wesley Shermantine to come visit him on death row at San Quentin Prison. And when I took some other people with me, and he gave me the location of several unrecovered victims that had been murdered. And since that time, I've been active working that case and trying to assist the people that are actively pursuing this case. And I'm very proud to say that in San Joaquin County, where most of this case is out of, they just elected a new sheriff named Pat Withrow, And I have high hopes that he will address the needs of the victims' families, because in my opinion, that's what comes first.
Okay, very, very cool, very cool. I forgot to mention, you can meet Jeffrey Rinek at the Mystery Writers Conference. He's going to be on a panel there in San Francisco at the end of September. So keep an eye out for that. And we're going to have a link to his book, In the Name of the Children, on the Opperman Report website in our bookstore. But you can also get it over at the, the benbellabooks.com. You can catch it over there. So I guess they say in all the stuff you sent over that your most famous case, your biggest case, I guess the one you're most proud of is the Cary Stayner case, the Yosemite killer, they call him. What can you tell us about that?
Anything you want to know. I just would like to say that, I've worked a lot of these cases, and it's important to note that one case is not more important to me. One victim is not more important than any other victim. What makes this case different in my life is the attention and notoriety I received because of the confession, which was considered to have come without any forewarning. It was a surprise confession, and at the time that Cary Stayner confessed, no one was really looking at him for some of the murders he confessed to.
How did Cary Stayner come on the radar for that? You'd think that he would have been a suspect right away, but how did he come on the radar for investigators in the Yosemite killing? Well, why don't you first describe what the Yosemite killings were, what that series of murders were, and then we'll get into Cary Stayner.
Sure. On February 15th, Valentine's Day weekend, Carol's son, her daughter Julie, and their friend Silvina Peloso traveled from Eureka to San Francisco International Airport, where they rented a car and went to the University of the Pacific, which is just south of Sacramento. They did that because Julie wanted to explore the potential of the cheerleading program. She was into cheerleading. And then after they visited the University of the Pacific, or UOP, the three of them continued on down to El Portal, which is 7 miles outside the gate of Yosemite. They rented a room at the Cedar Lodge, and at some point after February 15th, 1999, they went missing. And subsequent to their disappearance, about a week after they disappeared, an insert from Carol's wallet, which had her identifying information, was picked up at a busy intersection in Modesto. And at this point, it was believed that something had happened, either by way of a car accident or an assault, we don't know, but for that wallet insert to have shown up where it did was definitely out of the norm. And eventually, the burned out car was located about 60 miles from the Cedar Lodge on March 19th, about a month later. In the trunk of that vehicle were the burned bodies of Carol Thund and Silvina Peloso. About a week after that, the body of Julie was located near at a place called Don Pedro Reservoir. And at this point, we definitely have 3 victims. They've all been murdered. And for us as investigators, I know you don't see it on the TV shows, but we care. We care. When these things happen, we feel them ourselves by extension. And there was a lot of effort put into working this case. I had somewhat of a disagreement with my management again, and I was removed from this case as well. But 5 months later, on July 21st, 1999, a naturalist in the employ of the Yosemite National Park named Joey Armstrong went missing from her cabin, which was in a meadow on the park grounds. And it was in a small town named Foresta. And it was immediately noticeable that Foresta was very close to El Portal. But the FBI at that time stated that the disappearance of the naturalist was unrelated to the homicide that had occurred the previous February. And when they started conducting investigation into the disappearance of Joey, they were able to find a lot or some pieces of evidence. And there was also a witness who saw Cary Stayner coming out of the meadow where Joey Armstrong's cabin was located. And from conducting investigation at that point, they developed Cary Stayner as a suspect in the Joey Armstrong case. He was picked up Thursday, the 22nd of July, and interrogated for 5 hours by an FBI agent and a Park Service agent, but did not admit to anything. And that night, he was released through an error in the county jail. And so he was then located the following Saturday morning. And I, along with two of my partners, were dispatched to make contact with him where he was located at a nudist colony named Laguna del Sol. And it all flowed from there.
He lived at the nudist colony?
No, he didn't live there. He actually lived in the Cedar Lodge at El Portal. And after he was released from the jail, he went back to his room at the Cedar Lodge, sold off all of his belongings that he could, took the rest, and as we like to say, he was in the wind. And there was a lot of publicity given trying to locate him for contact. And from that publicity, the supervisor or caretaker at the Laguna del Sol observed him there. And he wasn't living there. He was simply visiting there. And that's when they called into the FBI office in Sacramento to advise he was there. And consequently, we were sent down and we requested that the Sacramento County Sheriff go with us.
So when you go down there to the nudist colony, what kind of description did you have? Because he wasn't wearing any clothes. They didn't say what he was wearing. What kind of description did you have to spot him?
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen the Pink Panther movies or A Shot in the Dark with Peter Sellers.
I've seen a couple of them, sure.
There was a scene in A Shot in the Dark where Peter Sellers, as Inspector Clouseau, had to go into a nudist colony. And what was really funny is that even though he was a police officer, he was forced to go in nude and he was carrying a guitar around to hide himself. And it was just, it was funny. It was really funny. The movie, it was one of the funnier scenes in the movie. So naturally, as we were driving down to Laguna del Sol, we were wondering if we were going to be allowed in. We were actually bannering about it on the radio, saying, well, if they don't let us in with our clothes on, do we still wear our guns around our waist? And trying to paint that picture is beyond my ability. But when we did get down to Laguna del Sol and the manager was waiting for us, he did comment pretty strongly that Cary Stayner was in the restaurant on the premises having breakfast and that he was fully clothed, which he caused us to believe the fact that he was clothed was an issue.
Oh, really? The manager was upset because he was wearing clothes?
Apparently, I don't know if you could say it was upset or whether he had a higher level of attention because of it. He had seen the advertisements or the news stories. He knew Cary Stayner was there. And, he, like many people, when they get that center of attention, he was quite animated. And he also made it clear to us that Cary wearing clothes in the restaurant was not what he would consider to be a normal thing.
All right, that's fascinating. I guess they have one of those signs, the opposite, right? No shirt, no shoes, no service, the other way around. Okay, we're with
well done.
I wonder if they even sell those signs. Anyway, we're with Jeffrey Rinek. In the name of the children and FBI agents' relentless pursuit of the nation's worst predators. He's telling us about Cary Stayner, the Yosemite killer who was the brother of Steven Stayner. I Know My Name is Steven from that movie back in the 80s. So what did you know about Cary when you picked him up there? Did you know about his history with his brother and all that?
I knew about his brother, Steven. I knew that Steven had been abducted in 1973 by two offenders. One of them was named Kenneth Parnell. He had been held for 7 years, and the offenders went out and abducted another 7-year-old boy when Stephen was no longer desirable to them. A couple weeks after the second boy was abducted, Stephen took him and walked out to a close by sheriff's station. And when they asked him what his name was, he said, "I know my first name is Stephen." And Cary Stayner is the older brother of Stephen. That's pretty much all I knew. I had been attending a conference in Sacramento. And when I stopped by the office on my way home, I heard them talking about Cary Stayner and mentioning who his brother was. And that's pretty much all I knew.
Did you know about Cary's previous brushes with the law?
No, I knew absolutely nothing about him. I had not been involved in the investigation concerning Joey Armstrong, and I also had not been involved in the investigation concerning Carol, Julie, and Sylvina for several months. So when we were sent down to the Laguna del Sol to pick him up, we were advised that he was a witness or a past boyfriend who was running in fear, and that we were just supposed to make contact with him.
Okay, that's interesting. So now, but your role in this operation was to go down there and question him, to be his interrogator?
No, actually, myself, John Bowles, and Ken Hittmeyer, we went down there simply to make contact with him and to follow through with direction that we were getting from the command post that was addressing the murder of Joey Armstrong. We were not told to conduct any interviews or anything other than to attempt to get his permission to be interviewed, to see if he would be willing to come back to our office in Sacramento to be interviewed. And also, they wanted to secure his vehicle so that they could get a search warrant for it.
So even though he was released on an error, you still needed his permission to bring him back for questioning?
Well, yeah, in our country, Ed, you're innocent until proven guilty. And especially in this instance, we had no reason to suspect him to have any kind of criminal intent. All we were told was that he was a witness. So absolutely, this was not an arrest. This was not a detention. It was simply a request by us for him to come back to our office so that he could be interviewed. And we did not expect to be the ones that would be interviewing him. We just thought we would be the delivery people. And when we asked his permission to come back with us, he agreed. And I told him that when he was done, I would bring him back down to the Laguna del Sol when he was finished up at the FBI office.
And once again, you said he was released on an error. What charges was he being held on originally that he was released on?
When he was picked up on Thursday, I believe, but I don't know 100% certainty, that he was picked up for being in possession of marijuana.
Okay. All right. So then, then what happens next? You're driving back. Is he talking to you while you're driving back? And what happens next?
Yeah, well, I, at the time, was driving a 2-door vehicle. And even though we had no reason to suspect him of anything, we were not arresting him, just for officer safety, we still handcuffed him behind his back and put him in the passenger seat of my car and belted him in with the seatbelt for safety. And John Bowles was following behind in his car, and we were taking him back to the Sacramento office of the FBI so that he could be interviewed. And when we had his permission and we were in the car, we finally got permission to head up to Sacramento. I was totally lost where we were. It was Cary Stayner gave me directions on how to get out of there. And the drive, it was Route 99, our drive north on Route 99 to the office should have been a 45-minute drive, but because of construction and lane closures, the drive lasted for about 90 minutes. And during that time, I had asked Cary previously if I could ask him about his experience with his brother's abduction, and he said that was okay. So while we were in the car driving, I told him a little bit about myself and the kind of cases I worked. I told him that I worked cases similar to his brother's case. I asked him if there was anything that law enforcement could do to have been better for his family's needs, for his needs. And, he was somewhat emotional, Ed, because he commented that the people who took Stephen and held him for 7 years, they themselves were sentenced to prison for 7 years, which he believed was really unfair. In addition to that, Stephen had been gone for 7 years, and when he came back, the country just assumed that the family would live happily ever after. But that was not the case, because the Stephen that came back was different than the Stephen that had left. He had been exposed to, alcohol, to drugs, to just all kinds of things that were not really acceptable in the family circles. And in addition to that, according to Cary, Stephen was living a reckless life. And eventually, I think about 7 years after he got back, he was killed in a traffic accident where it was believed that he had contributed to the occurrence of the accident. And once again, Cary was upset emotionally because the driver of the other vehicle had fled the scene, a hit and run, where his brother was killed, fled to Mexico. They extradited him back to the United States, but when he came back, they charged him with a misdemeanor and let him go. So there was a lot of emotion in him. I explained to him that I had resources, that if they could help his family, we could make arrangements to make them available, counseling, things like that, that could help his mom, his dad, and him and his sisters. He was grateful for that. And then most of the rest of the time, we were just two guys in a car driving, stuck together on a Saturday, a beautiful Saturday. And we were just making the most of it. I was telling him that my wife likes to go camping all the time because of her fish and wildlife background. And for me, I don't like to go anywhere without air conditioning, a bed, and a TV. So we laughed about that. During the ride back, he also, for me, was strikingly similar to a character I had seen in the movies when I was in college. The movie was called Billy Jack, and it was a story of a Native American who had gone to Vietnam, been in special forces, received all kinds of martial arts training. And when he came back from the war, he came back to his town in the Southwest, which was corrupt, with businessmen doing their thing. And this was maybe one of the first movies where martial arts was one of the themes in the movie, and Billy Jack was using his prowess with martial arts to defend and deal with the corruption that was affecting the school of his girlfriend and the people he cared about. And he was an extremely handsome guy. He always wore this remarkable black hat with a black T-shirt and jeans. And I asked him, did you ever see Billy Jack? And he said no. And he was so strikingly similar to Billy Jack that I asked him several times on the ride, and he kept saying no. And as we were pulling into the office lot, the parking lot, which is an impound and it's secured, so it's got locking gate. As we were pulling in through the gate, he looked at me and he recited verbatim one of the premier lines of dialogue from that movie. And, I looked at him, he looked at me, and we both started laughing. So apparently, he had decided that I had passed whatever, thing he had set out for me, and he shared it. And we also talked about the cases that I worked and the toll these cases take on me, not to mention the families, the other investigators. we just were two guys in a car having a pleasant conversation and, just going to the office. One of the things that I tried to stress to him was it was my experience with victim families that, for me, the idea of the term closure doesn't mean that everything goes away and you're fine. I liken it to a scar over a bad wound. And that scar is always there as a reminder. Sometimes the scar bothers you worse than other times. But that, in my opinion, closure was the ability to get through the traumatic event and pick up your life to whatever degree you can and move on. And so we talked about that concept of closure.
Hey, do you remember what the line was from Billy Jack that he said?
Well, to the best of my memory, Ed, Billy Jack was standing in a park in town, and I think the last name of the antagonist was Posner. I forget his first name. And they're standing there, and Posner's threatening Billy Jack, and Billy Jack says to him, "You know what? I'm going to take my right foot and I'm going to hit you upside your head, and there's not a thing that you can do about it." After which he does this big roundhouse kick and knocks Posner down this kick. And then, the fight is on from there. And that was the line that he recited to me, which is a big line from the movie.
Yeah, I remember that. I was in high school. No, I was before high school when that movie came out. I had another guest on. I think the actor is Tom Laughlin in Billy Jack.
Yes, Tom Laughlin.
Yeah, Tom Laughlin was a neighbor of O.J. Simpson and Nicole Simpson. And when they would have their fights and the police would come, Tom Laughlin would go over there and he would be the one breaking up the fights. He would be over there, acting as the the mediator, trying to negotiate a settlement to their fights over there. Yeah.
I think when you hear on the radio the one-hit wonders, I think that Billy Jack was almost like a one-hit wonder. It was definitely a sleeper, and I think it was like one of these movies that started some type of a following, and I know they did subsequent movies, but even Billy Jack itself wasn't that great, and the following movies were even worse. So I don't think it lasted very long. Yeah,
the sequels were horrible, but Billy Jack was a great movie. It was a cult film, like you said at the time. Had a huge.
It's so exciting for me when I meet someone else who's seen that movie.
Oh no, you kidding me? We were all doing those kicks, and it was because it was junior high. We all went and bought those boots, and they were all kicking each other like lunatics.
I was wearing jeans with my black T-shirt, walking around, and just what he would do. So it was funny.
Yeah, and I was in the Bronx, so imagine I stuck out like so time.
I thought I heard a New York accent in your voice.
Yeah. Well, I used to have a New York accent. I lost it. Anyway, with Cary Stayner, do you think maybe if you hadn't had that long ride with him to sit down and talk and just shoot the crap with him, that he wouldn't have confessed to you later on?
I believe that it contributed. I think that the time we spent together gave him an opportunity to assess me, judge me, to determine whether I would be of help to him with what only he knew he had to do. We didn't have any idea. When I was being cross-examined in the trial, and the defense attorney was prodding me frequently about the fact that institutionally there was enough information to be able to arrest him, I didn't know any of this. So I remember that during the break, the media were like screaming, how could he not have known? How could he not have known? Which is very frustrating for me because I didn't know because I wasn't told. And the whole time I was with him, I had never been told anything. The only thing I actually knew after that day was his version of the crimes that had taken place. I really didn't even know what had taken place according to the investigation.
Now, during that ride, did he talk to you about the death of his uncle? Because his uncle was shot to death in his apartment, right?
Yeah. We didn't talk about it there, but when we got to the office, and we were once again told that he was either a witness or like an old boyfriend fleeing out of fear, we had no idea what we could interview him about. And what you learn as an old agent, which I was, is that when you don't know what to do the interview about, the best thing to do is call in the polygrapher, because the interview is the platform which the test is done. So John and I decided we would call in our office polygrapher, a guy named Cary Stayner, who is just beyond anything to describe in terms of how great he is. And I also took the initiative of ordering a pizza for us, because none of us had eaten and we had taken Cary from his breakfast. So basically, that's really all we knew. So when the first thing we did is we asked him to sign what's called an advice of rights form to acknowledge that his discussions with us were okay and that he knew his rights. And then, because we didn't know what to ask him about, we simply did a biographical interview. And it was during that interview that he told us about his uncle being murdered, and that the Merced County Sheriff's Department was investigating it. And because cold cases is one of the things we did, I told him, maybe we could look into that. But I never, ever suggested to him the idea that he was the one who killed his uncle, because it doesn't take a brain surgeon to realize if you start accusing him of murder, he's not going to want to talk to you anymore.
Do you suspect he murdered his uncle?
Well, I don't know if what I know is accurate, but what I thought I knew at the time was that his uncle was killed by shotgun, and that Cary was the last one to have seen him. And I believe that when Cary started talking to me about what he had done, he mentioned that his uncle had molested him. I believed it to be that uncle that was murdered. So, you have that suspicion, but at a time like that, that's not what we were there about. And he had initiated the contact with me. And so I didn't ask him about his uncle.
Okay. And later on, he did say, though, that his uncle had molested him. Now, what about, and when he was 7 years old, when Stephen was 7 years old, the same time Stephen was being abducted is the time when he was being molested by the uncle. Now, what about, did he mention all the history of his family? He had a very bizarre family, right? A lot of sexual, I think even the father was a creepy guy, used to talk about sex to other people and stuff.
No, I think I should say that after we did the biographical interview and had asked for the polygrapher to come in and the pizza to come in, they both arrived at the same time. And my partner, John Bowles, came in to where we were and said, "Hey, the pizza's here, the polygrapher's here. What do you want to do first?" And at that point, Cary said, "Well, I want to skip the polygraph and I want to speak to Jeff alone." So at that point, we took him back to the original room we were interviewing him in. And I went out to see my other partner, Ken Hitmeyer, who was the acting supervisor, and asked him for guidance. And Hitman said, just, go in and see what he wants. And when I walked into the room, he was sitting in a chair. He had his head in his hands. He was kind of looking off into the corner. I walk in, I said, "What's up?" And he said, "I'm a bad person. I've done really bad things. He just was describing himself in very negative, detrimental terms. And I said to him something that I believe, and I say to others, and that is, that good people do bad things all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a bad person. What's important is to understand why a good person would do a bad thing. And that's what I explained to him we needed to go. And he told me that through several more minutes of talking to him, and I was exiting the room to see Ken Hittmeyer to get guidance from him. And eventually what came out of this is that he said he could give us closure about the case we were there, which was Joey Armstrong. And at the time, I didn't know Joey's name. And he also said there was more. I didn't know what he meant by that. I was suspecting, like you're bringing up, that it might have been his uncle that he wanted to talk about.
Right.
And when I finally asked him, what do you mean by more? He kept saying, more. And just out of desperation, trying to think of something, I asked him, do you mean the 3 women in Yosemite? And he didn't verbally acknowledge, but he kind of nodded his head, and that's what he said. At that time, Ed, that was a little hard for us to accept because the FBI had announced in the media that 2 other suspects were in custody although they were in custody for other charges, that they were the ones responsible for the murders in Yosemite. And I said to him, there have been plenty of contenders for the throne, but there's nothing here to prove that you're the one. But I went out and I advised Hitman what he was saying, and Hitman sent me back in one more time just to try and clarify everything. And when I went back in, Cary said before he does anything, he wanted to see pictures of little girls, which he knew we would have in our evidence because of the crimes we worked, which was child pornography and the resulting assault. I asked him if he meant child pornography, but he would not say the word. So I told him that I did not have the authority to grant that to him. And I told Ken, what he was saying, that he wanted to confess to Joey Armstrong, son Peloso, but he wanted to do it in exchange for seeing child pornography. So what Hitman decided was that we would move the interview up to the polygraph room. And at the time, the FBI wasn't real happy about doing recorded interviews. And so they had to adapt the room next door, the observation room, so that they could record the audio and the video of the interview. So they moved Cary and I up there. Shortly after we got there, John came up with the pizza, and I asked John to stay because we're friends. I feel that I work better when I'm with other people. Contrary to what you see in the movies and the TV shows, you don't automatically know what you're doing. You don't have a sense of calmness. You don't want to mess anything up. You don't want to say the wrong thing. And I always think that, and especially with John Bowles, he's really, really bright, that including John in the interview would be a good thing. And so he stayed. And the rest of the interview, which was 6 hours long, we did together.
I'm sure that you've never had a subject or a suspect ask for child pornography before.
That's correct.
So now, were you able to keep a poker face, or did you? Because I don't know if I could do that. I mean, I think it would be suddenly so disgusted and lose all respect for this guy that I was just kind of getting along with, even if he did kill his uncle or whatever, I would just lose all respect for him. Were you able to keep a poker face about that?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a poker face, Ed, because from working so many of these cases, I had come to the personal belief that many of these offenders, if not most of these offenders, have themselves experienced some type of victimization in their early years. I also believe that there's a Dr. Robert Hare who wrote a book called Without Conscience, which is dedicated to explaining the idea that some people do not have the capacity to feel emotion. In an instance like that, those people are the ones that can pass polygraphs when they're guilty and things like that. Cary Stayner did not strike me that way. And so I just believed that there was something in his background that we needed to talk about. One of the things he had said to me when we were in the room was that at 12 years of age, he had been molested by his uncle. And he also said that throughout his life, he had never been able to be functional with a woman, and this was something that bothered him greatly. So when he talked about wanting to see child pornography, I believe that it was probably resulting from what happened to him when he was molested.
And there was something else too in the notes about that when he was a child, he would fantasize about murdering and raping women.
Yes, he would say that sometimes he could envision world peace, and other times he felt like he could kill everyone in the world.
When he was asking you for the child porn, was he shameful? Was he embarrassed that he was asking for this? How did he even get the words out?
Well, that's interesting. It's a great question, Ed, because he didn't ask for child porn.
Right.
He asked for pictures of young girls. And when I said to him child pornography, he would not say the word pornography. And I took that to believe that he was ashamed of what he was asking for, but that what he wanted was something he wanted more, that had a greater value to him than the degree of shame he would feel.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes before the break. There was something else in these notes about confirmation bias. Does that come into play now, or is that something we should tackle after the break?
I'm not sure what confirmation bias is.
Okay, let me see if I can find it in your notes here. It's something about, where is this here? Oh, you talk about confirmation bias, especially in regards to the Yosemite murders. What is it, and why do you call, how can it affect investigations? You're not aware of that question?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think what you're referring to is when investigators have a preconceived idea
right.
of things about the case. And a lot of times that will cause people to look to confirm information they think they have, and not go further to try and work against that information to see if it is in fact confirmable. And in this case, when you talk about confirmation bias, I think that would apply to the other two suspects, Dykes and Larwick.
Yeah, what about it? Because besides, there was two other suspects in custody, but there was a whole group of people that were suspects, right? And what happened to them? Did Cary ever implicate them, or totally they're off the hook?
In our time together and in his confession, he said he did not know them at all. And he never indicated any knowledge of even associating with them or who they were, where they'd been. The reason that they were being looked at is because Eugene Dykes, whose nickname was Rufus, he was given a polygraph in prison, which we all got to observe. And he failed that polygraph. And the polygraph examiner, it wasn't Harry, I forget, it was a California Department of Justice examiner, a good guy. And his responses were such that, well, if I had done this, or this is how it would have gone down, it was something that would be very easy to mistake for a confession. And at the time, we all believed it might be a confession. And this is why the intense investigation on Dykes and Larwick, and they were associated with a group of people that their way of making money was going around and doing identity fraud. They would intercept mail from the state, for instance, with driver's licenses. They would open them up, get the information, the copies, whatever. Then they would reseal the letter and put it back in the box so the person who had it wouldn't know that it had been compromised. The same thing with credit card. And so they caused the suspicion that the victims might have become victims because they wanted to do financial fraud.
And you were able to find something that disproved that they were involved in this?
Well, no, actually, at the time that Cary Stayner confessed, they were still the main focus of the task force and of the FBI office. And it wasn't until Cary Stayner confessed and that we recovered the evidence that he was talking about in his confession that it was pretty clear that he was not, that he was the one. And I think it's important to note that I was asked several times afterward, if Stayner would have committed these crimes in the presence of Dykes and Larwick, or if they had been together or had an association. And my answer then is my answer today. I don't believe, and I've never seen an instance where an offender who is sexually dysfunctional will do a sexual offense in the presence of other men. Just imagine, because it's depicted in movies and on TV, that when a man is unable to perform his sexual duties, it's humiliating, it's embarrassing. Many times they're looked down upon because of it. You're not going to find a guy going out and committing offenses like this in the presence of men who probably have too much testosterone. And Cary Stayner said in his interview that he did not know these two guys, had never met them, seen them, or was aware of them other than what he saw on the news. And I believe that.
Okay, we're with Jeffrey Rinek, former FBI agent. The book is called In the Name of the Children, an FBI agent's relentless pursuit of the nation's worst predators. He'll be on a panel, the Mystery Writers panel in San Francisco at the end of September. You can get a copy of this book at the Opperman Report bookstore and also on Amazon.com. And his publisher, you can get it over there too, real quick, find it. Ben Bella Books. And we'll be right back with more of Jeffrey Rinek